Yeah, I think for innovation, so the way I came at innovation, so we had, at Engage, we have 250 people in the agency. And we did a lot of digital marketing, mobile development for clients. But when you're building and working on behalf of clients and the revenues coming in, and it's hard to be very innovative. So it was a couple of years ago, I decided to make a very small team within the agency that was unbound by client deliverables. And so it was 4 or 5 people, a developer, a designer, a strategist, and their task was to build and play with new technology, and it doesn't have to directly apply to any one client, but we would then share that with clients. And so they were very early on with, the Xbox and things that you could do with, the interaction with the second screen, and that helped fuel a lot of additional thoughts. And so I always think of arming people, whatever you have in your tool belt, so our creatives, once they were exposed to something new, it allowed their mind to free up. So you have to have the money coming in, but sometimes if your innovation is tied to that, it makes it really difficult to actually innovate. So that was one of the ways we were able to do it at Engage.
Well, I thought you were going to talk a little bit about Dragon Army and how you're, kind of not that that should be your motto, but failing quickly, right? Getting things out there. But I'm going to move on to David. David, you can tackle that. David, and
here's something that I thought was really interesting about Turner Broadcasting is they had an established business with their cable networks, hugely successful, very profitable, and yet they recognized that the business of cable television was being disrupted by digital, just like every media before that has been disrupted by digital. And it's a very difficult thing to innovate at the same time that you have a successful business. Most businesses are unable to do that. And so the way I look at this is I kind of think, so I thought it was interesting you said you formed a separate group. I think it's 2 different skill sets. One skill set I call defending the fortress. And the other skill set is exploring new territories. And typically people don't come with both those skill sets. And so I think it's very smart that you formed a separate group to explore new territory. I had a chance to sit down for an afternoon with Marissa Meyer, who at the time was VP for search at Google. She's now the CEO at Yahoo, and I had a chance to pick her brain about how they did product development at Google. And she said the same exact thing at Google, that it is very important for the people who are doing new things, exploring new territories, that they not be chained to the existing businesses, because the existing businesses tend to hold things back with that. So that's my experience. So I'd say think about defending the fortress versus exploring new territories and the different skills.
Just so that at Google, every employee is not only allowed but encouraged to have one day of working on something else that is not related to whatever the project is. And I think this is very important. In academia, it's very easy because my students we have 40 graduate students. It's very easy to just let a lot of innovation coming bottom up. And I know that if you're a company that is not Google, sometimes you don't have the resources to allow someone not to work a day for the client. But if you have somewhere to give, I would encourage everyone to give some day or for some time or for people to come up with their own ideas, their own innovations. For me, it works great because a lot of what I've been doing in my lab came from students that just had freedom.
Yeah, we try to do a little of both, servicing, defending the fortress and exploring. And it's been described from a staffing perspective and a strategy as a little schizophrenic for that same team. So, but we don't all have the luxury of being able to, whether you carve out a day or you're carving out a team to do it, but it makes sense. Paul, I assume your innovation is limitless. It's the creativity that your mind is going 100 miles an hour. You're just limited by slow people who execute around you, right? Can't keep up with your imagination.
That's partly true. I do get an opportunity to create a lot of different things. But let me talk about this whole defending the fortress and the importance of it, because I actually think there's one aspect of innovation that is very important. If we innovate too quickly and counterintuitively, that's like giving somebody wearable computing or putting Google Glass in somebody's car. So you're driving down the street and it gives you information, and by the time you've assimilated all the information, you've crashed your car into the back of another car. And that's potentially a problem in our innovation is that we must make sure that we don't innovate that's in a way that's counterintuitive, that we have to kind of defend the fortress by staying really solid and knowing what it is that we're doing. This is my interpretation of it. I may be completely wrong on this, but so in terms of storytelling, which is where I come from, if we constantly innovate, we're constantly having to teach our audience how to experience things and they may not like that. As an audience, we want that moment in The Matrix where he falls backwards and we see the bullets go past him for the first time. And we say, I've never seen that in a movie. We want those moments that make us, and that's the product that we're selling to our audience. We really want them to take a breath and say, that was cool or that was memorable. So I love to innovate. I innovate in ways that I think are very interesting. I've gone to the console-making video game industry and asked to do storytelling in games in a way that it was never done before. I'll try to make this very quick. It's a very quick anecdote, but what we did with a game called The Darkness, we actually asked them to spend some of the money on the storytelling assets, not just the punching and kicking and fighting assets. And in that game, you as a mobster with demon tentacles, which is pretty violent, you have to fall in love with the girl. So we spent 25 minutes of gameplay where you go in and you do little conversations with the girl, fall in love with her, sit down on a sofa, watch To Kill a Mockingbird, and if you actually watch To Kill a Mockingbird with the girl, you score points. Well, the players wanted to score the points. They wanted to get all the achievements. So they did all of the things that we asked to, and at one point you're given a dialogue tree and it says, she says to you, what do you do? And you are supposed to either lie to her by pressing a button or tell her the truth by pressing a different button. Well, if you tell her the truth, it leads to the same ending, which is she says, is there something else you want to tell me? And you're supposed to press one button that says, tell her that you love her. As you press the button, your character says, nothing. So you never tell her that you love her, and then 10 minutes later in the game, she's dead. And you feel terrible, and it drives the story. Okay. The reason I'm saying this is because the publisher bought into this, and that game sold 1.6 million copies, even though the gameplay was rated at 10 out of 100. Why? Because it did so well in storytelling and cinematic experience. In a sense, the innovation that we're looking for isn't necessarily innovation of product or new bells and whistles. It might sometimes be, how can we really, really drive people's emotions? Because that's what's going to drive into our product.
Interesting. So, it comes back to that, sometimes that bleeding edge and that first wave on the beach gets destroyed, right? And so that leads us into that next topic, which is incubation. So there is incubation, I guess once something has been cultivated, then it's acceleration. It is the world, Jeff, that you're living in. Jeff is right in the middle of the Atlanta Technology Village. I spent the afternoon there the other day. There's so much of that stuff going on. It's obviously a great energy. Jeff has talked about how, I'd love to get a product out every 2 months. If it doesn't work, no big deal. If it does work, then I'll jump on. So to me, that's incubation. That's putting your money where your mouth is, and not over-promising and under-delivering. Just saying, I'm going to see what happens. And so it's an extension of innovation, but it truly is fostering something. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is how we're thinking of it at Dragon Army. We're going to try to launch a title every 2 to 3 months. And if you actually go to dragonarmy.com, you can sign up to be on our beta list. We're going to have something out in the next couple of weeks. And we want to get feedback before we really, push it out. But it is that tricky balance. And this I don't know how this is going to play out, but I know I started my digital agency my last year of college and didn't know anything. And it took years. And if you were to kind of lay over our story in a textbook, we should have, closed it down 5 times before we finally made it. But it was that never give up attitude that pushed us. And so what I'm really curious about is as we launch mobile titles, at what point do you say, gosh, if we really put more into this, it will be successful, or this just isn't working? And that's going to be a balancing act that I think we're absolutely going to force ourselves to go through. But it is going to be interesting to see how that happens. And at the Village, at Atlanta Tech Village, with the different startups there, they're incubating different ideas and doing the same thing and trying to say, all right, we're going to give this 2 months, or we're going to try this for a certain period of time and see if that has legs. But you have to be willing to strike that off as a learning opportunity. Like, that didn't work, but what did we learn from it, and how can we pivot? So when I think about incubation and startups and ideas, I think about learning from those mistakes and moving quickly and not going down a path too long, but that balancing act of, okay, this is something and let's put everything into it versus let's pull back the reins and be confident enough to try something different.
But I think you're also leveraging your experience of doing things in a bubble or, in your basement that no one can see and you're not an expert in everything isn't the best way to do it. So you're mitigating risk by surrounding yourself. If this is a B2B play, I'm going to bring in people that have great B2B experience. And I'm going to, just like you sat me down and wanted to know about the B2C publishing space, you're going to ask those questions before you put something out there. David, I think you bring maybe a different perspective to this. I definitely want you to cover that kind of customer acquisition. I'm a startup. Do I build an MVP? Do I get it out there and see what if it works, or do I paper prototype? How am I going out and making sure that I'm building something that people want?
When I think of incubators, the first thing I think was an incubator. I think of like this thing that's hatching chicken eggs. You ever see one of those? And it's temperature controlled, so it's just the right temperature. And like probably even the right I've never raised chickens, I'm guessing it's like, probably the right humidity, and just everything is just right to do what? To protect the chicks. And so when they hatch, they're gonna have a good, safe environment so they can grow up. And insulated from like, they're not gonna have hawks swooping down and get them or whatever bad things happen to chickens. And for startups, it was fashionable several years ago to have something called an incubator, where it would be sometimes it's just names, but in an incubator like this, it was a safe place for a startup to be able to find its legs. And I'm not really a big fan of that. I think that startups, insulating them from the realities of the marketplace, I think can be deadly for startups. And what I like to see is, I was part of an accelerator program. I like being able to see how can you get to market fast with something that there's going to be something that people actually want to buy. And avoid a lot of businesses fail. Why do most businesses fail? Because they build something that not enough people want to buy. And so how do you mitigate that risk? How do you get that so that risk isn't completely unbounded? And I think that the way to do that is every entrepreneur I know, and whether you're an entrepreneur, you're in a mid-sized or large company, or coming up with ideas, for those of us who do that, by showing hands, how many people in this room work on new ideas, new products, new businesses? So a lot of us. Everyone who raised their hand, this to be so. We're all delusional. We love our ideas to the point of irrational exuberance, like a new mother loves their newborn baby. And so I like the idea of being able to see things as they really are, not be protected from the realities of the marketplace, and really find out if there really is market demand for what you're doing. But with a lot of it takes to overcome that sense of delusion that every one of us has. It takes a lot to get there, and it's not incubation. It takes a lot of look the tiger in the eye and see things as they really are. And to get to that, I'll tell you what, at Flashpoint in the accelerator program, the director of that, Merrick First, who's brilliant. I learned more from him about business in 3 months than I learned in a 20-year career. It's like he kicked the crap out of us for 3 months. You really need an environment like that so that you're not delusional and spending years building something and millions of dollars potentially only to find out not a lot of people want to buy it. That's my take on incubators and accelerators. I'd say accelerate, focus on accelerating, which is find out how you're bounding the risk that nobody wants your product.
So using David's chick analogy, I saw this great nature program where these water birds, they have their nest on this sheer cliff and in these little cracks in the rock. And the chicks hatch all nice and warm in their little nest, and they're all fluffy and cute. And you're looking at the show going, oh yeah, they must have to wait there till their mom feeds them and they can fly away. But no. What they do, camera pulls back and you watch these little chicks just drop out of the nest, bouncing like pinballs all the way down, hit the bottom. If they live at the bottom, there's foxes around that then try and eat them, and if they miss the foxes, they have to make it all the way to the water because they're water birds. So to David's point, and having gone through a couple products like GameTap and GameTree TV where we had money to really think it out, build it, and grow it, and then put it out in market, I think this next time around, my goals is really just to get dropped out of the nest and see what works and see how to survive from there, because really Like David was saying, I think his experience with the acceleration was incredible because it really made you look at reality. It made you only do what was going to create actual revenue or success or adjust or pivot, so that you have a product that's actually going to survive and not be protected to the point where it just grows up and then starves to death.
Gil, I'm sure you have some stories to tell there.
Yes, so maybe a couple of points. First, Georgia Tech has been great in incubating or accelerating, and I just want to give credit to Venture Lab, which is a great Georgia Tech-based incubator, and then many companies like ours go out to ATDC, which is a great environment to develop companies. But I want to say something about the failing quick and making sure that people want to buy what you sell. I think many of us, at least in my circles, look up to the kind of model of Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs is known or has been known not to do focus groups. He doesn't care what people want. He will tell them what they want, and they will want it, and create a market. And no one needed an iPad before there was an iPad, and now everyone cannot live without an iPad. And many other products. And everyone say, I'm going to be the next Steve Jobs. They don't know that they want it. I don't need to test it. I'm as genius as he is. And very few of us are. And I think that now, you can ask people that I work with, I constantly, every little change, I'm trying to create a focus group, bringing more and more people to check. I realize I'm not Steve Jobs, and very few are. And I think exactly what you said. You can really quickly check if you are on the right direction or not, and you should do it as often as possible.
And I will add, if you ever get invited to one of Gil's focus groups, they're a lot of fun. There's beer and pizza, and we've done several of them.
Yeah, I mentioned Marissa Meyer before. She impressed upon us the idea of fail fast and fail cheap. And, I think of some, Blake and I worked together at Turner Broadcasting. We worked on various products. I didn't think we failed fast. We failed on some things, but we didn't fail fast and we didn't fail cheap. We failed lengthy and expensive. And you're not going to hear anyone to say tweet this, fail expensive and fail over a long time. I mean, that's a bad thing. But you know what? This happens in business all the time from people who are very smart. So it's a soundbite, fail fast, fail cheap. But I mean, it's not enough to know it. You've got to actually do it. If you're not doing it, you don't know it.
So I think I have a question for Paul, but the one thing I think is different though is, so does anybody in here play Dots or Candy Crush?
Yep.
And not ashamed to admit it? These are ridiculously popular games that if you were to describe them to somebody who hadn't heard about them, they'd say, I want to play that. That sounds ridiculous. But when they were created in a way that people can't stop playing them. They're the most addictive things of all time. So I do think at a certain point, and again, I kind of have a question, play moderator for a second, for Paul, because with storytelling, you told the story about, you sit down and watch the movie with the girl and, probably like most people here, they're like, that sounds crazy. And then you said 1-point-something million people played the game, and that changed everything. So I do think in the creative space, I'm not so certain it's focus groups and test markets the way that it is with some other products. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
All right, so I only got to 3 of my 5, but we're getting the hook, so this is going to be the final answer, so lead us out with a bang.
Sure, so I'll try to do well. I love the fact that you guys stayed, you had all the film people and they're really beautiful people, and then the music people are really interesting, and then you got Revenge of the Nerds at the end. Thanks for staying, we appreciate it. But yeah, the thing about it is I am very lucky in some of the people that I get to meet, and one of the people that I spend time with is Dick Cook, who used to be the chairman of Disney for around about 35 years. He's fond of the stuff that I create, and he and I, every so often, will play golf together. So I spend 5 or 6 hours on a golf course with Dick Cook. And this guy's made 70 movies that have grossed over $100 million, and he's a very pleasant guy. And so when he speaks, I listen. What Dick Cook told me is, in a sense, when he told me this, I said, okay, I'm never going to forget this, and I will always stick to my guns. And what he told me was that in his experience at Disney, when he was the chairman, when movies came in and they were built creation by committee, it was usually, and it was like the studio development process, it was usually a movie that he couldn't get behind, and then it wasn't really as lucrative, and it didn't make as much money. But when he gave support to singular creative vision, those were the films that did really well, like Pirates. You know, everyone said you couldn't do Pirates, and everybody was worried that Johnny Depp looked funny because he played Keith Richards as a pirate. But that has been an amazing, lucrative franchise. So I think that when we look about incubation and when we look about like development, it's not necessarily just a matter of looking at the development of ideas, but it's also a matter of looking at the people who are making those ideas, looking at how they act, looking at what they do. Do they have a work ethic? I have, amongst the things I've done, worked in a lot of comic books, and so that means I'm exposed to a lot of comic book artists, and it gets really difficult sometimes because they want to be an artist, they just don't really want to do the work or hand it in time. And of course, you can't not hand in a monthly book of Spider-Man because if you don't do it, someone else will do it. So I think of incubation, and I always think of it as two things. It's brilliant ideas, but it's brilliant people behind them with a kind of a work ethic and a personal ethic. If you get that magical confluence of stimuli, that's when you're going to make something amazing. And I think that's what I look at, is I try to have a work ethic as much as I try to have, really, really good ideas.
Very good. All right, guys, please join me in thanking these guys. Thank you very much.